G'day, Hugh here from videsign.com.au, design company based on the Gold Coast in Australia. Thank you for joining me. Today I thought we'd have a look at how you can combine Photoshop and Luminar 2018 to work on your street photography. I like to hop into Photoshop to begin with, do some adjustments in there to create a specific look, and then take it into Luminar to add the finishing touches. So let's hop into Photoshop to begin with and we'll see how it's done. Okay, so we have this photograph I took here in Lisbon, in Portugal, on a particularly rainy morning. The streets were dark and damp. People had their umbrellas out. The buildings were dark. They were also damp. The sky was overcast. But it creates a bit of a moody feel when you've got that sort of environment. So I like to do a two-step process sometimes with street photography editing, because I find Luminar has many good filters and effects that you can put onto your street photography, but I like to kick off proceedings in Photoshop. So we have this photo open in Camera Raw, and what I like to do is just to begin with our basic develop, which is to bring down the highlights and open up the shadows, which gives us that a better look. Work on the whites, holding the Alt key down and sliding our whites to the right till we see some blue appear. So we just scale that back, and holding the Alt key down with the blacks as well. Obviously there's some blacks quite darker in this photo, being quite a dark photo, so we'll increase the clarity and the vibrance, and we'll bring the clarity up a fair bit. Now you can see it's not particularly straight, so what I like to do in this instance, I will just bring up the exposure a little bit as well, is come up into the transform tool here, and I like just to use the basic tools that it provides. It's very easy. It straightens up your photo for you and provides the correct perspective. I mean, you can just do the level or the horizontal and the vertical, or one that does all, and I think I don't really ever use that one. But if I don't have any luck with either of these, if you have a look here, it really doesn't change too much in this photo, being a portrait type photo. When it's landscape and you've got quite a lot of distortion, you can play around with a few of these and see which works best for you, and then you can do further manual adjustments if you do require. So now we've got that, I'm fairly happy with that as a basic develop adjustment, and we can say open image. Now this is where I like to apply my initial look to my image, and it requires just doing a few adjustment layers, about 4 or 5 of them, not too over the top. Just have this selected here. So we can do, the first adjustment layer is selective color. So I like to start with the reds, make the cyan -15, magenta 15, and with the cyans we do the opposite of making that 15 and that -15. It's a very subtle adjustment layer. And so the next adjustment layer we're going to add on is going to be the channel mixer, and we're going to choose blue, and what we want to do is make the greens 100 and we want to make the blues 0. Now that creates quite a distinct look already. Now don't worry about too much because it looks extreme. We'll work on that as we go along. So the next adjustment layer we want to do is work on, I think we'll work on the curves. And what we'll do is we'll choose the reds and just slide the greens as well, just across a little. The blues, well, it depends on how blue we want this to look, or how much we want to change it. So I think it's a little pinky, so I think we'll have a bit more of the greener look in there, and then we can choose our RGB and work on our contrast. I'm going to bring that down, like so. And now we'll just add one more adjustment layer. And what we'll do is we'll just come up here. I think probably the best one to do would be just work on the hue and the saturation. So we've got a few that we can just adjust there with the reds and the cyans. So we'll just bump up the reds. And we'll do that up to about 20. Really saturate that in. And with the cyans, we'll just increase the saturation there. Okay, now you can see we've got quite a stark looking difference between what we began with and where we're at now. Quite a stylized look, but depending on what your preferences are, you might not want it to be so strong. So without it on, with it on. So I've selected all the layers and just play around with the opacity there as to how much. Now look, that's very blue, and not that it's a bad look, but if we bring this back, we'll start to get that style in there. So what I'll do there is just bring it to about 75% for the purposes of this tutorial. So if we're happy with that, that's all the adjustments we'll do in Photoshop. So we'll go File, Save As, and we'll put it into Tutorial 35. And what we'll do is we'll change it to a JPEG, and we'll just call this Tutorial. Spell that correctly, Tutorial 35. And we'll save that. Photoshop does its saving. Okay, so now that we've saved that image in our folder, we can come into Luminar and open that image up. So we'll come up to Videos, which is down here, and then go into Tutorials, Tutorial 35, and open up our new image. Now, Luminar has a lot of things that we can play around with to work on our street photography. So I always like to keep the original picture as its own layer. So we will add a new adjustment layer, and we'll start editing from there. Now, I'm not a huge fan of presets, but I do like them in street photography for really speeding up a few processes. Now, I don't mind like a mild image enhancer being applied. Now you can see it's quite contrasty, but we can work on that down the track. But you can always slide the intensity of these presets up and down according to what you feel works for your photo. Now, I know it's added a fair bit of saturation in, but again, we can work on that as we move along. So now we've applied that preset, I'm just going to add one other one, and we add a new adjustment layer for that. Come up into our categories, and we'll choose street, and I like subway because it allows us a few shortcuts, but it always is very intense, so I tend to bring that down to about 20% or so. And then we'll just hide those there, so we've got a bit better to look at. And then you can see already what Luminar has done with a couple of presets applied to our picture. Now I tend to go through a couple of other steps. Now I do a new adjustment layer, and we get our filters up here. And I always start with the Accent AI filter, and I like to boost that right up. That really does give us a bit of an improvement in our image. Okay, then I also like the fact that in street photography we need a fair bit of detail in it. I apply some microstructure. We can look at adding some structure further down the track, but I like to add a bit of microstructure in there. Now I'm a fan of the Orton effect, but not to its full extent. I do like the way it just provides a little bit of a gloss to the photo, but I keep it pretty much around 20 or thereabouts because I don't want it to be too strong. You can see now we've moved from our Photoshop to JPEG through to where we're looking at now, which is quite an improvement. So then what I probably would do is I'd just look at one last one on this particular layer, and that's working on the contrast. And I just would like to bring the contrast down because I don't like the photos to be too strong on the contrast. Sometimes I do, but not in this case. It's already fairly contrasty. So now that we've done that, I'd like to add a new layer to separate the edits that I'm doing. So add a new layer. Now what I would probably do with this is work on the saturation and vibrance. Now I've been playing around with this whole idea of bringing the saturation right down to, say, around 40 something, but then upping the vibrance in the opposite direction. So they play off against each other. It's a good way of reducing the intense saturation, but still providing that saturation and color in specific spots. Now that might be a little bit too desaturated now, but we'll just switch that off and you can see the difference. But if you like the umbrellas and the bag and the yellow and the building, we can then add in a second saturation of vibrance filter and just bring this vibrance right up, maybe all the way. And then what we can do is brush in the areas that we want to just focus on. So we choose the brush size. In this case I'll just make it a little bit smaller, and we'll just make sure paint is selected. Opacity is going to bring that up to about 75%, and brush it in to the areas that we want to return some of that saturation. So I really like that yellow there, the green of that building, the umbrella and the bag, and a little bit on that car there. So it's not affecting the entire image, but it's you can see here by switching on the mask, you can see the areas that it will actually improve those lanterns there as well. Switch the mask off and come up here and say done. So finally, I will now add a new layer again, because I do like to keep things separate like that. So what I'll do now is I'll work on specific areas of the photo. So we'll have, in professional, we have dodge and burn available to us, and we can start painting. We'll get lighten on there and just lighten up some areas of this that are a bit dark, which is always handy to be able to just add a bit of exposure in different areas. And you can always erase if you're not happy, and you've also got the darken option if you think, well, we'll darken up that car a little bit. Just different areas which appeal to your particular eye. So now we've done that, we can say done. And I'd like to add a vignette, so we come up to the top here and choose vignette, and bring the amount down to work out what sort of vignette we're keen to have on this, and we feather it right in. We'll be able to see it and work out how intense we would like it to be. So perhaps back there, and then we'll feather this back. So we have a vignette on there now. And if we want, we can just boost up the inner light a little. And now one last thing I might do, and this just to give it a bit more of a creative feel, is we'll add in some golden hour, just a little, to give that a little bit of warmth there, which gives us a fairly nice feel. So that's the two steps of using Photoshop and Luminar to work on your street photography. So we can bring it into Photoshop to create this look, so our color palette and how it feels, and then we can really just finish it off in Luminar with a lot of very easy adjustments. It's very cool using Luminar in this situation because it's easy to take on the road with you, and you can edit your street photography quite quickly. So I hope you've enjoyed that tutorial. Stay tuned for more. I did travel around a fair bit in the last month or so and have quite a lot of photos to show you that we can work on. Most of it's street photography, but there's a whole range of different photos that I've taken, so we'll have a look at them down the track. So until next time, I'll see you later.